Dum, bum, bum, ba, da. Hello, students. Let's learn today about absolute monarchies. Rich people making money. Yeah, so that's what we're talking about today. This is a time period where kings and queens in Europe had so much money, and they basically just spent it all on themselves, and they did not care about their common people. So let's dive into it. Come on, clicking the button. There it is. All right. So all this new money is coming in from the New World. European kings and queens had sent out their explorers, their conquistadors, their traders, and now they're just getting mad money, especially from the Americas. And this whole idea that the whole rest of the world is working for you and that the money from the rest of the world comes into your country and that you keep it all at home and you use that money and you just build up your country at the expense of the rest of the world, that is called mercantilism. And that was absolutely happening at this time. A good example of mercantilism was Spain imported 100 tons of gold and 16,000 tons of silver from the Americas during that 200-year period right there. So just so much new wealth is coming in. And you would hope that these European kings and queens would use that money to improve their countries and help their common people and get people out of slavery. But oh no, they spent that money on themselves. So wow, it's a lot of cash coming in. All right, so here's the ports of Europe with all these ships coming in loaded with goods from the New World. And then, yeah, the mother countries eating gold and silver, food, raw materials. And yeah, these are some terms that you'll probably see in some primary documents. A monarch is a king or queen. It's also ruled by family heritage. So when the king dies, who takes over? Usually his son, the prince. And then the prince's son takes over someday, becomes the next king, so on and so on. And during this time period, religion was still a huge part of people's lives. And there was this belief in the divine right of kings. Whenever you had a king who was like spending money on himself and you were really poor, like you wouldn't really feel envious for the king. Well, because you believed in God, and there was the divine right of kings says God made this person the king, therefore you should respect that person, you should allow him to spend all the money, to live the lavish lifestyle. Like we feel good for our king, even though he has literally billions of dollars and we live off pennies. So there wasn't too much frustration with the people during this time because, yeah, they were just religious and they believed the king was appointed by God. So there you go. All right, here's some of these pictures that show this concept. A lot of European kings love to show they had a relationship directly with Jesus and angels and stuff. So the king's getting lifted up by angels, and then Louis XIV riding around an angel, following him everywhere he goes. So yeah, this period of history we're talking about today is definitely the absolute monarchs of Europe. These kings and queens had all the money and all the power. They're sort of like modern day dictators because they didn't really give anything to their people. They treated all their people like slaves, and they lived these super duper awesome lives while most of the people in their country were broke as a joke. Yeah, and that's, yeah, I just kind of elaborate on this. They lived in the most elaborate luxuries. I know, like, Louis XIV, for example, he would have food shipped in from Indonesia. You know, like, and this is before airplanes, so like these ships have to sail all the way around the world just to deliver him his dinner. Now, they obviously wouldn't get there in one day. You know, he'd plan out his meals months ahead of time. But yeah, the rest of the people of Europe lived in poverty and squalor. These royals built fantastic palaces, ate all the food they wanted, while everyone else was just poor. So this is actually a really sad period in world history when you look at the majority of people in Europe, because yeah, the kings and queens had all this amazing money and super duper fancy, but terrible inequality. So much inequality, I am angry about it. So, like, here's the Louis XIV greeting people at his palace. You can see just all this splendor and luxury. And then, oh, this guy's just kneeling down for the king, like, oh, I love you so much, king. Give me some of your money. And then these were men's shoes during this period. Those are diamonds encased around the buckles right there. So, like, yeah, there's also this weird thing with fashion for kings where they wanted to look taller and prettier and male makeup and all that stuff. But most Europeans lived like this, so it was not great. Um, all right, so yeah, royal living right here. So this is Buckingham Palace in England. This was a palace built during this time. It's actually one of the smaller palaces, but yeah, I don't know, 100 rooms or so. Still a very, very big house for one family. I think this is the king's private chamber, and it's just got all these gold embroidered furniture and stuff, and they've had that for hundreds of years. And then every single meal was a banquet where the king would call in all of his rich friends and the people who were just sucking up to him all the time. And so, yeah, you'd have these 300 person breakfasts with just amazing food. And yeah, it's wild. So much fancy living, ridiculous. These big palaces, gold embroidered everything. Okay, so I'm really going to focus today on teaching you the life of one of these absolute monarchs. Probably the best known absolute monarch was Louis XIV of France. His nickname was the Sun King, and he ruled France for 72 years. Probably the longest, well, probably, yeah, one of the longest ruling guys ever, because I think he took over when he was like 12, so he died when he was 84. But yeah, Louis, he was an egotistical maniac. Everything about France had to be about him. So much so that he said, Lestat c'est moi, I am France. So, wow. But I'll tell you, if there was a human being who lived the best life, like we're talking the most luxuries, the most happiness, the most money, it was probably Louis the 14th. Like this guy spent money and was at the top of the game more than anyone else I can think of. Like even like Jeff Bezos and Steve Jobs, they had some humility. Jeff Bezos, he owns Amazon.com and he drives to work in like a really old car. Louis would buy the brand newest new car and then drive it off a bridge at the end of the day because money was not a concern for this guy. It had to be the top tier fancy stuff every day, all the time. Louis had 45 children with 8 different women, and those are only his legitimate children. I think I read somewhere that he probably had maybe as many as 500 kids, but a lot of them were, with side girls, and he doesn't want to give them the credit, so. But anyway, 45 official kids is already so many. And yeah, anyway, we'll get into more stuff about Louis's life. But so here's a picture of Louis. By all accounts, Louis was an obese dude. Okay, he ate so much food, and I mean, when you're eating amazing, great food all the time, you're gonna keep eating. And yeah, just the fanciest life. Here's all these people just loving Louis, and then people come to praise Louis and ask for some of his money. He's like, maybe I'll give you some money, maybe I won't. So yeah, he spent a fortune to surround himself with luxury, and the most fancy piece of jewelry in the world is the Hope Diamond. And Louis got his hands on the Hope Diamond. He saw this attractive 17-year-old girl who was hanging around the palace, and he says, "Hey girl, you want to go out with me? I'll give you the Hope Diamond." And he did. So that's just how much he threw money around. Here's an actual quote from one of his meals. So, one observer reported that he once devoured 4 plates of soup, a whole pheasant, that's kind of like a chicken, a partridge, that's a smaller bird, in garlic sauce, 2 slices of ham, a salad, a plate of pastries, fruit, and hard boiled eggs in a single sitting. Nearly 500 cooks, waiters, and other servants worked to satisfy his needs. Okay, and that's not 500 cooks for like all of his guests. Like his guests had their own cooks and waiters and servants. Louis had 500 people for just him. Like, oh my gosh, this dude, he probably didn't even like physically get out of bed every morning. Someone probably untucked him, like helped him move, put his shoes on. Like he just had servants for everything. And yeah, like wow, it's amazing. So here's Louis chowing down, and then yeah, more pictures of Louis. He kind of looks like a woman in this picture, but that was the style back then. Okay, so The thing that Louis really was obsessed about is he wanted to have the biggest house in all of Europe. And he did. He built it. And I think it's still the record to this day. He ordered the construction of the Palace of Versailles. Versailles is just outside of Paris in France. And Versailles, yes, it's the biggest palace in Europe. Today it's a museum. When I was in France, I didn't get a chance to go to Versailles. I really wish I did. It's probably a pretty cool museum. It's incredibly big. It has these wonderful, amazing gardens. I think its total land area is like 4 square miles. Versailles cost $2 billion to build, and that's in money 400 years ago. So today it might be in the trillions of dollars if you were to rebuild this thing. 1,500 acres of gardens, 1,400 fountains. The main building has 2,000 rooms. Like, how many rooms are in your house? Like, even one of the hotels on the Las Vegas Strip doesn't have 2,000 rooms. That's amazing. Um, anyway, while walking around his palace, Louis enjoyed looking at the fountains. However, there was not enough water pressure to run them all at once, so a servant would run ahead of Louis, turn on the fountain just before Louis would see it, and then turn it off after he walked past. That's so amazing. All right, so here's Versailles from the top end view. You see all the fountains and the gardens, and then here's Versailles today. So it still pretty much looks like it did in the past, and it's of course got gold embroidery around all the windows and the top. Just oh my gosh, it's so fancy, ridiculous. Okay, and then this will actually come up a couple times. There's this one very famous room in the Palace of Versailles. Louis designed it to be like the room where he would hold important meetings, and it's called the Hall of Mirrors. And a lot of really famous stuff happens in this room later in history, and I'll bring it up like 3 times because a lot of times like people meet in Versailles and do stuff in the Hall of Mirrors. Um, yeah, let me zoom in on it real quick and I'll zoom back. So this is the Hall of Mirrors. It's a room just encased in gold, diamond chandeliers, beautiful pictures on the ceilings. Supposedly when the light shines in through the Hall of Mirrors, light does all this really crazy cool stuff. And it's the best room in the world. It's a question on like a bonus question on some of my quizzes. I know that. So the most famous room in the world is this one, the Hall of Mirrors in Versailles. And yeah, the gardens are just top notch. They've got golden statues all over the place too. This Versailles will win the episode of MTV Cribs. Okay, like it's the best crib in the world, straight up. All right, so yeah, the gardens right there, and then this is Versailles from Google Maps. So as you can see, the gardens of the palace. There's literal freeways going around it today. So it's so big and incredible. Yeah, golden statues, super duper fancy. Okay, so Louis is the one example of the super absolute monarch, but then there's this other royal family of Europe called the Habsburg dynasty. They were based in Austria, but the Habsburgs were famous of marrying their children to other families of royal blood. And I mean, well, how many countries are there in Europe? Maybe like 30. So the Habsburgs married off their kids to these 30 different royal families, and then the next generation happens and the Habsburgs say, well, we gotta marry these kids to also royal families. But when there's only 30 families to choose from, very soon your family tree starts to intersect. And the Habsburgs, I'm pretty confident I can say they got their various family members with every single royal family in Europe. And this was back in like the 1600s. So then 100 years later, the Habsburgs still have this requirement. We got to marry ourselves to other royal blood. But now everybody's in their family. So what they started to do was marry cousins to each other. They married brother and sister to each other. And that's called incest. And incest is really, really bad. Okay? Because once, if a brother and sister were to make a baby, the baby's genetic code wouldn't be varied enough to really like create a full person. So a lot of these Habsburgs have some terrible deformities. A lot of these Habsburgs end up having mental disabilities. So this whole attitude of we've only got to marry our daughter to a prince, it's not going to work out so well. But yes, near the end of this time period, every single European is going to be related to, or every single European king or queen will be related to each other. And there's some pretty gross pictures coming up here. Fair warning. So here's one of these Habsburg kings. I want you to notice his jaw. He has a really sharp jaw, and that feature will get expanded as his children and grandchildren intermarry with each other because there's not a lot of genetic diversity happening. Here's another picture of the Habsburgs of Spain, and they all kind of look the same. Okay, not a lot of variation there. And I want to go through Charles II's family tree. Okay, so we're going to go back through time to see his super ancestors. So his third great grandparents were Ferdinand of Aragon and Elizabeth of Castile. They had a daughter named Joanna who married Philip. Okay, and together they had Catherine. All right, great. So they have Catherine. But then Catherine is, she's totally fine genetically, but then she meets up with her, what is this? Is this her cousin? Yeah, she marries her cousin, John III, who has, or actually no. So Catherine's brother Charles marries Isabella of Portugal. They have Philip II. Okay, great. And then Isabella and Charles also have Maria. So Philip and Maria are brother and sister. But then Maria has a daughter. Okay, so anyway, it goes cousins have Maria. And then Maria has a daughter. This daughter marries her uncle, Philip, who has Philip III. Philip III gets with his second cousin once removed, Margaret, has Philip IV. Philip IV has Philip IV marries his niece, Marina, and has Charles II. So Charles II already has some incest, some cousinship, some uncle and niece stuff going on. It's gross. Anyway, here's what the Habsburgs look like. So let's check it out. There's one Habsburg prince. Ugh. Here's a Habsburg prince. Ugh. Here's a Habsburg prince. Would swipe right. Here's a Habsburg prince. Would you swipe right or left? Would you go on a date with this guy? What if it's for all the money in Europe? Here's a Habsburg princess. Are you interested? What do you think? Come on, let me know. And then here's another Kylie Jenner lip challenge right there. That's amazing. These Habsburgs really have no genetic variation at all. So some other absolute monarchs that history mentions. I'm not going to deep dive into them. Charles V, he was the guy who owned Austria and Spain. A lot of his name is on stuff because he was in charge when so many of the conquistadors were taking over the Americas. Philip Habsburg II of Spain, he was also a pretty big guy. I've seen some of his stuff around. Ivan the Terrible of Russia. Oh, wow. Ivan the Terrible had one son, and when he heard his son might be gay, he drowned his only son in the well. In a well, yeah. So he's very, very not pro-LGBTQ. Peter the First of Russia, he was actually a really good absolute monarch. He shared his money and his wealth with the people. He got a lot of new inventions, new ideas into Russia. So I'd high five Peter the First. Frederick William of Prussia, he really reorganized Prussia, kind of set it up to eventually become the country of Germany we know today. But there are still absolute monarchs on our planet Earth today. Countries like Saudi Arabia, North Korea, they're still practicing a lot of these same things that were done so long ago. So there's Ivan the Terrible, there's Philip the Great, and here's the king of Saudi, or I don't know if this is the king, it's one of the Saudi princes. He has a golden jet. Okay, do you have a golden jet? I don't. And here's more of the Saudi royal family. He's got this whole cabin crew of nice-looking ladies to fly him all around the world. And here's North Korea. You got the Korean word for pig is twedgy. So I like to call Kim Jong-un right there twedgy because he's really fat and his people are super thin. It's super rude. And there's him flying around in his airplane while his people starve. Kind of messed up. So all these royals are living in incredible luxury. The common European people, they're putting up with it. They believe in the divine right of kings. But after a couple hundred years of this, the common people are going to start getting pissed. And they're going to start asking deep questions. Why does the king have so much money while I'm broke as a joke? And change is coming. And it's going to cause a whole bunch of people to die. All right, that's it for me. Peace out.